The scent of ice, sweat, and dominance hit Brooke Rossi the moment she stepped into the rink. It was almost overwhelming, the thick, heady mix of alpha pheromones clashing against the chilled air. Her inner Omega bristled at the sheer power rolling off the players as they skated in synchronized aggression. She clutched her camera strap tighter, inhaling deeply to center herself. "You're here for your project, not for distractions. Focus, Brooke." She turned to find her older brother, Liam, skating toward her, his sharp amber eyes narrowing with suspicion. He was already dressed in his practice gear, his jersey stretched tight over his powerful shoulders. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, ears twitching slightly beneath his helmet. His tone was protective, but the slight curl of his lip showed his wolf instincts were already on edge. Brooke rolled her eyes. "Nice to see you too, Liam. I got assigned to document the team for my portfolio." Liam growled lowly, the sound barely perceptible, but Brooke caught the way his claws flexed at his sides. "They gave you this team? Out of all the possible sports, they stuck an unmated Omega with a pack of aggressive alphas." She crossed her arms. "First of all, I can handle myself. Second, I didn't exactly choose this assignment. And third, I'm not unmated. I'm just not bonded." Liam's nose flared, his tail flicking in frustration. "Same damn thing. Do you have any idea how alphas act in a pack? How their instincts?" "I live with you, don't I?" Brooke interrupted. "I grew up in a house full of wolves. I know how alphas act." Before Liam could argue further, another presence entered their space, a powerful presence. A ripple went through the ice as Grayson Harbor skated over. Even from a distance, his dominance was suffocating. His sharp blue eyes locked onto her, his expression unreadable, but his energy radiated something raw and unshaken. Unlike the other wolves whose scents ebbed and flowed with movement, Grayson's remained cold, almost controlled. Brooke swallowed hard. "Holy hell. Everything okay here?" Grayson's voice was deep, rough with years of command. He was taller than Liam, broader, his scent carrying hints of pine, frost, and something distinctly alpha. It was intoxicating even as he kept his distance. Liam sighed. "Yeah. Just found out my sister is our new photographer." Grayson's gaze flickered to her camera, then to her. Something passed behind his eyes. Disinterest, maybe, or curiosity, but it was gone before she could decipher it. "She gonna be in the way?" he asked, blunt as ever. Brooke bristled. "I'm not in the way. I'm working. You know, like you." A ghost of a smirk tugged at Grayson's lips, but it didn't last. "Just stay out of the pack's path, Omega." The way he said it sent a strange thrill down her spine. He didn't say it mockingly, but he didn't say it gently either. It was a warning, a statement of fact, a reminder of where she stood in the hierarchy of their kind. Brooke lifted her chin. "I'll be fine. Just pretend I'm not here." Grayson held her gaze for a beat longer before turning back toward the ice. Liam huffed, rubbing his face. "Brooke, I swear." "Relax," she said, snapping a few test photos. "I'm here for my career, not for a mate." But as Grayson skated away, his muscles flexing beneath his jersey, his scent lingering in the air like a silent challenge, Brooke had the sinking feeling that staying unaffected was about to be a lot harder than she thought. The first practice session was pure, raw dominance. Brooke stood at the edge of the rink, her camera lens following the movements of the players as they wove across the ice. The power in their forms was undeniable. The way their wolves reacted to each other, their aggression barely contained beneath their jerseys. But her focus kept shifting to one player in particular. Grayson Harbor. He was different. Unlike the other alphas who barked orders and bared their fangs in bursts of dominance, Grayson was quiet, controlled. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, his scent sharp with restraint. He played with lethal efficiency, his wolf contained in a way that felt unnatural. Brooke adjusted her camera settings, trying to capture him in motion. The first shot blurred. The second was better. By the third, she was locked in, snapping shots of his speed, the determined set of his jaw, the way his body moved like a predator in its element. She was so focused she didn't notice Liam skating toward her until... Brooke move. Too late. A player crashed into the boards just inches from where she stood. The impact rattled her, making her stumble backward onto the cold ground. Before she could react, a firm, calloused hand gripped her arm. A growl. Brooke's breath caught as she looked up into ice-blue eyes. "Grayson." His scent flooded her senses. Pine, frost, and raw alpha power. His grip on her arm was tight, not painful but unyielding. His wolf was awake now, barely concealed beneath his human form, and it felt him. Her Omega felt him. For a long, stretched-out second, the rink disappeared. It was just them. Instinct. But then, as if realizing what he was doing, Grayson pulled away. You need to be more careful. His voice was too controlled. Brooke's heart pounded as she got to her feet, brushing snow off her jeans. I was fine. His eyes flickered with something. Annoyance? Concern? It was impossible to tell. You shouldn't be this close to the ice, he muttered. You don't belong in the middle of a pack. Brooke bristled. I belong exactly where I choose to be. Grayson's jaw tightened. For a second she swore he was about to say something else, but instead he just turned and skated away. Brooke exhaled, feeling something coil deep inside her. What the hell was that? From the other side of the rink, Liam was watching. His eyes flicked between his best friend and his sister, his expression unreadable. He had noticed. They all had. And Brooke had a feeling that was only the beginning. The air inside the rink was colder at night, the sharp bite of ice mixing with the faint scent of wolves and sweat. Most of the team had already cleared out, leaving the space eerily quiet. Brooke had planned to stay late, reviewing her shots in peace, but when she stepped onto the rinkside bench, she realized she wasn't alone. Grayson Harbor was still here. His large frame moved fluidly across the ice, the dim lights casting shadows over his sharp features. He skated like he belonged to the ice, every push of his legs controlled, every movement precise. But tonight something was different. He looked frustrated. No, not frustrated, on edge. His wolf was restless. Brooke swallowed, gripping her camera instinctively. She should leave. She should pretend she hadn't seen him. But something kept her there. And then, as if sensing her presence, he stopped. Slowly, Grayson turned, locking eyes with her. Even from a distance, the intensity of his gaze made her stomach flip. What are you doing here? His voice was rougher than usual, his scent laced with something darker. Brooke hesitated. I could ask you the same thing. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he skated toward her, stopping just short of the boards. Up close, his presence was overwhelming. His scent, normally controlled, was stronger now, tinged with something primal. I needed to clear my head, he muttered. Brooke tilted her head, studying him. Not working. Grayson exhaled through his nose, his jaw tight. His usual cold detachment wavered, just enough for her to catch a glimpse of the wolf underneath. Not really. Brooke didn't know what possessed her, but she leaned forward slightly. Want to talk about it? Grayson's gaze flickered to her lips before snapping away. His fingers curled into fists, his posture rigid. No. A beat of silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Brooke let out a small breath, fighting the heat rising in her chest. Why did it feel like the entire rink was holding its breath? You keep looking at me like that, Grayson muttered, and I'll start thinking you don't know what you're doing. Brooke frowned. Looking at you like what? Grayson's lips quirked into something that wasn't quite a smirk. Like you don't realize what happens when an Omega tempts an Alpha. Her heart stuttered. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. He should step back. She should break the tension before it swallowed them whole. But instead she held his gaze, feeling her wolf stir inside her. I'm not tempting you, she said quietly. Grayson's expression darkened. His nostrils flared slightly, his control slipping for just a second. That's the problem, he murmured. You don't even have to try. Brooke's breath hitched. For a moment, just a fleeting second, she thought he was going to lean in. The air between them crackled, thick with unspoken heat. But then just as quickly as it came, he stepped back. His shoulders tensed, his mask slipping back into place. Go home, Brooke. His voice was cold again, distant. Brooke blinked, the sharp contrast of his retreat stinging more than she expected. Grayson. I said go. And just like that, the moment was gone. Brooke clenched her jaw, swallowing the strange ache in her chest. Fine. If he wanted to keep pushing her away, so be it. But something inside her knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. The next morning, Brooke walked into the rink with a clear plan. Ignore Grayson Harbor. If he wanted to act cold and distant, fine. If he thought pushing her away would keep whatever was happening between them from unraveling, fine. But the universe had other ideas. Because the moment she stepped inside, another alpha had his hands on her. Not aggressively, not in a way that screamed danger, but too close. Ethan Calloway, one of Liam's teammates, was grinning down at her, his dark golden eyes gleaming with interest. He was a good-looking wolf, taller than her but not as overwhelming as Grayson. His scent was lighter, cinnamon and wood smoke, not unpleasant, but not right. Didn't know we were lucky enough to have a beautiful Omega documenting our every move, Ethan teased, leaning against the boards beside her. Brooke forced a small smile, shifting her camera strap over her shoulder. Just doing my job. Ethan tilted his head. Still, must be hard being surrounded by so many alphas. Bet some of them give you trouble. His eyes flickered past her, toward the ice where the team was warming up. Harbor doesn't seem too friendly. Brooke's stomach tightened. Why did he bring up Grayson? She shrugged, keeping her voice neutral. He's just focused on hockey. Ethan hummed, stepping just a little closer. His scent curled around her, not forceful but testing. Alphas did that sometimes. Tested boundaries, gauged responses. Brooke was about to step back when a low growl rumbled from the ice. Not just any growl. Grayson. The temperature in the rink dropped. 1 second Ethan was beside her and the next, Grayson was there. He didn't skate. He didn't walk. He prowled. His massive frame loomed between them, his scent suddenly thick and sharp, drowning out Ethan's completely. Ice and pine biting like a storm. Brooke barely had time to process it before Grayson's hand curled around her wrist. Unyielding. Ethan's smirk faltered. He lifted his hands in mock surrender. Relax, Harbor. We were just talking. Grayson didn't even look at him. His glacial blue eyes were locked on Brooke. You're in the way, Grayson muttered, voice deceptively calm. Brooke's breath hitched. Not you're bothering her. Not leave her alone. You're in the way. A warning. A claim. Ethan, to his credit, just chuckled. Right. Wouldn't want to be in the middle of whatever this is. He shot Brooke a knowing look before stepping away. The moment he was gone, Grayson didn't let go. Brooke swallowed hard. His grip was firm but not painful. His scent wrapped around her, thick with tension. You're overreacting, she murmured, glancing down at where his fingers still circled her wrist. Grayson growled again, softer this time but no less dangerous. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Brooke lifted her chin. Talking to a teammate? Yeah, I do. Grayson's fingers tightened for just a second before he forced himself to let go. He exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his damp hair, his wolf still on edge. He was scenting you. Brooke blinked. What? Grayson's jaw clenched. He was testing his scent against yours. Seeing how you reacted. Omegas don't always notice, but alphas do. Her cheeks burned. Had Ethan been trying to stake some kind of claim? She huffed, shaking her head. Well, if he was, it's not like it worked. I didn't feel anything. Grayson's eyes darkened. A muscle in his jaw ticked. You don't just ignore something like that. Why? She shot back, folding her arms. Because it offends your alpha pride? Something snapped. Before she could react, Grayson stepped forward, caging her against the boards. His scent hit her full force, overwhelming, heady. His voice dropped to a near growl. Because it makes my wolf want to rip his throat out. Brooke's breath caught. She barely registered the team still on the ice, the eyes that might be watching. All she could focus on was the alpha in front of her, his chest rising and falling too fast, his control slipping at the edges. Her Omega should have shrunk away. He didn't. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, baring just a sliver of her neck. Not in submission. In challenge. Grayson's nostrils flared. His pupils dilated. For a moment she swore he was going to do something. But then, Brooke. Liam's voice shattered the moment. Grayson jerked back like he'd been burned. Brooke turned just as Liam skated toward them, his sharp eyes flicking between them, his wolf already suspicious. What's going on? Liam asked, voice edged with warning. Grayson stepped away, his mask slipping back into place so fast it almost gave her whiplash. Nothing, he muttered, brushing past them without another word. Brooke let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Liam frowned. What was that? Brooke swallowed, forcing a small smile. Nothing. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Because Grayson Harbor's control was slipping. And her Omega liked it. Grayson needed distance. From Brooke. From her scent. from the way her Omega challenged him without even realizing it. But no matter how much space he put between them, he felt her. In the rink when she moved along the boards with her camera. In the locker room when Liam's scent clung to her clothes. Even in his own damn apartment, because she was his best friend's sister, and her scent was already imprinted on his world. And that was dangerous. Because Grayson wasn't like the other alphas on the team. He didn't let himself get attached. He didn't chase after things that weren't his. He didn't take what he couldn't have. But Brooke? She was making it impossible not to want. So he did the only thing he could. He pushed harder. Brooke knew something had changed the second she stepped into the rink. Grayson was ignoring her. Not the cold, calculated detachment he usually wore like armor. This was deliberate. When she walked past, he turned the other way. When she lifted her camera, he skated out of frame. When she spoke to Liam in the stands, he didn't even glance her way. And it pissed her off. Because after that moment yesterday, after his words, his possessiveness, his wolf barely contained, he was acting like she didn't exist. Fine. If he wanted to play this game, she could play too. Two could push. That afternoon the team had a scrimmage. Brooke stayed pretending to focus on her photography, but really she was waiting. She wasn't stupid. She knew Grayson could feel her. Knew he was aware of her every move. So she made sure he noticed. She laughed louder when she talked to Ethan on the sidelines. She let her scent unfurl just enough when she walked past. She didn't even have to try with the other alphas. They gravitated toward her naturally. And Grayson was losing it. She could see it in the way he played. Reckless, aggressive, like he had something to prove. By the time the scrimmage ended, she was almost proud of herself. Until she turned a corner and ran straight into him. The hallway outside the locker room was quiet. Brooke's breath caught as Grayson's large frame blocked her path. His damp hair was still slicked back, his jersey clinging to his broad chest, sweat cooling on his skin. His scent was pure alpha heat. And his eyes were dangerous. Brooke swallowed. Grayson. Whatever game you're playing, stop. His voice was low, rough, barely restrained. She lifted her chin. I don't know what you're talking about. Grayson took a step forward. She didn't back down. You're scenting up every alpha in the damn rink, he growled. You think I don't notice? Brooke arched a brow. Why do you care? Grayson's nostrils flared. His wolf was close. I don't. Brooke let out a small, humorless laugh. Liar. His hand shot out, bracing against the wall beside her head, caging her in. Brooke should have felt trapped. Instead she felt alive. You think this is a joke? He muttered, voice dark. You don't understand what you're doing. Brooke looked up at him, her pulse thrumming. Then explain it to me. Grayson exhaled sharply, his throat working like he was holding something back. His eyes flickered, alpha instincts battling his control. For a second, just a second, she thought he might break. But then, you need to stay away from me, Brooke. His voice was softer. Almost like it hurt him to say it. Brooke's chest tightened. Why? Grayson clenched his jaw. Because if I don't stay away from you, he murmured, I won't be able to stop myself. The words sent a shiver through her. Not a threat. A confession. A second passed. Then another. And then he was gone. Leaving Brooke standing there, heart pounding, her wolf restless. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. Grayson barely made it to the showers before the scent of Brooke ripped through him again. Sweet. Infuriating. His. No. Not his. She wasn't his. She was Liam's sister. She was off limits. She was a danger to every wall he'd built around himself. And still, his wolf was losing its mind. He'd spent years mastering control, locking his instincts in a cage, refusing to be the kind of alpha who let his nature dictate his actions. But Brooke? Brooke made him forget every damn reason why he shouldn't want her. He slammed his fist against the cold tile, letting the icy water burn away the heat rolling under his skin. He needed space. Distance. He needed harbor. Grayson's head snapped up. His best friend leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, eyes too sharp. Grayson's wolf bristled. Because Liam smelled like Brooke. Not in an alpha's way. Liam had no claim on her beyond blood. But it didn't matter. It still made something ugly coil in Grayson's chest. Liam sighed. You gonna tell me what the hell is going on? Grayson turned off the water, grabbing a towel. Nothing. Liam huffed out a laugh. Yeah. Because from where I'm standing, You've been acting like a damn feral wolf every time Brooke's in the room. Grayson tensed. Liam's eyes narrowed. And she's been different too. She's never played games like this before, but with you? It's like she's daring you to do something. Grayson exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Drop it, Liam. No, Liam snapped. I won't drop it. Because you're my best friend and she's my sister, and whatever this is, it's not nothing. Grayson clenched his jaw. I'm not touching her. Liam studied him. But you want to. Grayson went still. A muscle in Liam's jaw ticked. Tell me the truth. If she wasn't my sister. Grayson cut him off before he could finish. It doesn't matter. Liam stepped forward, his wolf brushing against Grayson's. A warning. She's an Omega Gray, Liam said quietly. She's not built for games like this. If you're gonna walk away, do it now. Because if you snap, if you claim her. Grayson's eyes flashed. He'd already thought about it. Too many times. And if Brooke ever bared her throat to him in submission, if she ever whimpered his name in the way only an Omega could. Grayson growled, stepping back. It won't happen. Liam studied him for a long moment. Then finally he sighed. For both your sakes, I hope that's true. And then he left. Brooke knew something was wrong the second she saw Grayson outside the rink. Because he was waiting for her. And his expression was unreadable. Brooke slowed her steps, heart pounding. Grayson. I'm done. His voice was flat. Brooke frowned. Done with what? He exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his damp hair. This. Whatever this is. His jaw clenched. It's not happening. Something inside Brooke cracked. She stared at him, waiting for an explanation that never came. That's it, she asked, voice quieter. Grayson's eyes flickered, just for a second, just enough to show her that this wasn't easy for him either. But then his walls went up again. Yes. Brooke inhaled, steadying herself. If he thought she was going to break, he was wrong. Fine. She lifted her chin. Run away, Grayson. I don't care. A flash of something dangerous crossed his face. I'm not running. Brooke's lips curled. She knew what buttons to push now. No, she taunted. Because it sure looks like you are. Grayson growled. Oh, dangerous. But he didn't move. Brooke stepped forward, invading his space. You want me, she whispered. And it terrifies you. His breath hitched. Brooke smirked, leaning in just enough for her scent to wrap around him. Tell me I'm wrong. Grayson's eyes were nearly black. His nostrils flared. His wolf was fighting. Then suddenly he was gone. Just like that. Brooke stood there, heart hammering, watching him disappear into the night. And this time, she knew he wasn't pushing her away because he didn't want her. He was pushing her away because he did. Grayson should have left town. He should have packed a bag, driven as far as he could, and put distance between himself and Brooke before he lost control. But instead he was here, pacing his damn apartment, fighting off the ache that had been gnawing at him since the moment Brooke whispered. Tell me I'm wrong. He should have said it. Should have lied. But the truth was a weight in his chest, heavy, immovable. He wanted her. Too much. His wolf was restless, pacing inside him, instincts clawing at the edges of his control. And it only got worse when he picked up her scent in the hallway, sweet and warm, cutting through the cold like she belonged here. Then came the knock. Soft. Certain. Dangerous. Grayson's entire body went tense. He could ignore it. He could pretend he wasn't home, let her turn around and walk away. Another knock. Stronger. Grayson exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair before yanking open the door. Brooke stood there, eyes bright, cheeks flushed from the cold, her scent curling into his apartment like a challenge. Grayson clenched his jaw. What are you doing here? Brooke didn't answer. Instead she stepped inside, forcing him back. Grayson's control cracked. He exhaled sharply, stepping away from her, putting distance between them before he did something stupid. You can't be here, he ground out. Brooke arched a brow. Why? Afraid of what might happen? His nostrils flared. Brooke. You've been pushing me away since the second we met, she said, stepping forward. But you never tell me why. And I think I finally figured it out. Grayson swallowed hard. You don't know anything. Brooke tilted her head slightly, Omega instinct. A calculated move. I know you want me, she whispered. And I know it scares you. Grayson's breath hitched. Her scent was everywhere. His muscles locked as his wolf fought him, begged him to move closer to take. But he wouldn't. He couldn't. So he did the only thing he could. He growled. It should have sent her running. But Brooke? She smiled. It was small but undeniable. A spark of defiance. A silent dare. Grayson snapped. Before he could think, before he could stop himself, he had her pinned. 1 second she was standing there, pushing him, teasing him, and the next, her back was against the wall, his hands caging her in, his body so close she had nowhere to go. Her breath caught. Grayson's voice was a low growl. Dangerous. Barely human. You don't know what you're asking for. Brooke's pulse fluttered. Then show me. Grayson's grip on the wall tightened. His wolf was seconds from breaking free. And then, Brooke. The voice was Liam's. And it hit Grayson like a slap. He jerked back, breathing hard, forcing space between them before he did something he'd never be able to take back. Brooke let out a slow breath, her lips still parted, her eyes knowing. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Grayson couldn't sleep. No matter how much he tried to wear himself out, no matter how many hours he spent on the ice or lifting weights in the gym, his thoughts kept dragging him back to Brooke. She was always there, her scent, her eyes, the challenge in her smile, the way she moved. And the way she'd stood up to him. He could still feel the soft press of her body against the wall, could still hear the teasing dare in her voice. She'd seen through him and it unsettled him. But more than that, Brooke wasn't afraid. That terrified him. Because Grayson was all about control. He had to be. His wolf was too dangerous, too strong. And if he didn't have control, he'd lose everything. But Brooke? She made him want to give that up. He didn't know what was worse. The fact that he couldn't stop thinking about her, or the fact that he didn't want to. Brooke sat in the stands watching the team practice. Her camera was in hand, but her eyes were focused on Grayson. It was obvious he was struggling, his every movement stiff and strained, like he was trying to hold himself together. And maybe, just maybe, that was the problem. She could smell the tension rolling off him. The way his wolf fought for control, how it thrashed beneath the surface, wanting to take what it couldn't have. Her. The more he pushed, the more she pushed back. If he thought she was going to back down, he was wrong. She had her pride. She had her independence. But this was different. She didn't just want him, she wanted to understand him. She wanted him to stop hiding. To stop running. To stop pretending he didn't feel the same pull she did. Grayson slammed his stick into the boards as the whistle blew, signaling the end of practice. He was fuming. It didn't help that the second he stepped off the ice, his eyes immediately found Brooke, her camera aimed at him and her lips, curved in that damned smile. He stalked toward her, every muscle in his body screaming at him to turn and walk away, but he couldn't. Not anymore. Brooke looked up just as he reached her, her smile shifting into something a little more dangerous. Enjoy the workout? She asked, voice low, teasing. Grayson's lips curled into something that resembled a snarl. You should be careful, he growled. You're pushing too far. Brooke didn't flinch. In fact, she took a step closer, her scent mingling with his like a challenge. Oh, I'm not pushing far enough. She tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. You're trying to keep me at a distance, but you don't realize it's making me want to get closer. Want you to lose control. Grayson's wolf snapped to attention. His eyes darkened, a flash of amber briefly visible in the irises. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't running. She was the only Omega he knew who would dare to do this, to go toe-to-toe with an alpha like him. It was maddening. He grabbed her wrist before she could pull back, his grip firm but not bruising. His pulse hammered in his throat. You don't know what you're asking for. I do. Her voice was breathless and her pulse was racing. Grayson's heart pounded harder. She was close. Too close. Her scent was wrapping around him like a drug. His wolf roared in his head. He couldn't let this happen. But the moment Brooke reached up to touch his chest, her fingers brushing against his jersey, his restraint snapped. Without warning, he yanked her toward him, his lips crashing onto hers. It wasn't soft. It wasn't gentle. It was raw, a desperate collision of teeth and heat. Brooke let out a surprised breath, but she didn't pull away. She melted into him, her hands moving to his neck, fingers threading through his damp hair. His body fought him. Every instinct told him to stop, to pull away before he went too far. But she was there. her scent, her warmth, her presence. All of it consumed him. When they finally broke apart, both of them gasping for air, Grayson stared down at her, barely able to focus. Her lips were swollen, her eyes dark with desire. "You're right," she whispered, her voice rough. "I don't know what I'm asking for. But I'm not scared." Grayson's chest tightened. The words burned in his throat, but he couldn't say them. He couldn't claim her, not like this. But he couldn't walk away either. He ran a hand through his hair, his breath still coming in ragged pulls. "You're making this harder." Brooke's eyes softened just a little, her voice gentle. "I'm not making anything harder. You are." For a moment Grayson didn't move, didn't speak. He just looked at her. The woman who could ruin him, who was already ruining him. Then with a deep, shuddering breath, he spoke the words he knew would change everything. "You're not walking away, are you?" Brooke's smile was small, but it was everything. "No," she said, her voice a promise. "And neither are you." Grayson hadn't slept. His wolf was restless, pacing in his mind, demanding something he refused to name. Ever since that night with Brooke, he had been coming undone. He had let himself slip, let his control shatter just enough to taste what could be his, what should be his. And now there was no turning back. He could still smell her, her scent lingering in his apartment, on his clothes, under his skin. But it was wrong. Because no matter how much he wanted her, he couldn't have her. Not when she was his best friend's little sister. Not when she was an Omega and he was an Alpha, barely holding on to control. Not when she deserved better than him. He had spent years locking his emotions away, keeping his wolf on a tight leash. He had to. His father's death had shattered him, and he had sworn never to let anyone close enough to see how broken he truly was. And yet Brooke, stubborn, beautiful, impossible Brooke, was ruining everything. Brooke wasn't backing down. She had given Grayson space, waiting for him to come to his senses, but she was done waiting. She had kissed him and he had kissed her back. That meant something. She had always known Grayson was difficult, that he carried wounds he refused to show. But she wasn't afraid of his sharp edges. She wanted to break through them. So when she found him in the locker room after practice, sitting on the bench with his head in his hands, she didn't hesitate. "Hey." Grayson tensed. His shoulders squared, his posture shifting immediately into defense mode. "Brooke," he said, his voice low, unreadable. "We need to talk." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "There's nothing to talk about." Brooke narrowed her eyes. "You really think you can just pretend nothing happened?" Grayson clenched his jaw. It was a mistake. The words cut. Brooke felt something inside her crack, but she refused to let it show. Instead, she crossed her arms and tilted her head. "A mistake?" Grayson stood up, towering over her, his presence commanding, overwhelming. "Yes." Her wolf stirred at the challenge, at the lie he was trying to tell himself. "Then why are you shaking?" she whispered. Grayson stiffened. His hands were curled into fists, his muscles taut, his breathing uneven. Brooke stepped closer, her scent wrapping around him like a whisper of temptation. "I feel you, Grayson," she said softly. "Your wolf. You need. You're barely holding on, aren't you?" His eyes darkened, flashing something primal, something wild. "You don't know what you're talking about," he ground out. Brooke lifted her chin. "Then prove it." His breath hitched. "Prove to me that it meant nothing," she challenged. "Look me in the eyes and tell me you don't want me." Grayson's wolf snarled. His control snapped. Before she could react, he had her against the lockers, his hands braced on either side of her head. "Don't push me, Brooke," he growled. She didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head, meeting his gaze with unwavering confidence. "Or what?" His breathing was ragged, his wolf howling inside him. She was too close. He smelled too good. She was his. No, she wasn't. She couldn't be. Grayson forced himself to step back, turning away before he did something he couldn't take back. "This can't happen," he said, his voice rough like it hurt to say the words. Brooke's expression softened. "Why?" He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Because I can't protect you from myself." Silence hung between them. Then Brooke did something he didn't expect. She reached out and took his hand. Not forcefully. Not aggressively. Just soft. Steady. "Grayson," she whispered, "I'm not asking you to protect me." His breath caught. "I'm asking you to let me in." His entire world tilted. His wolf stilled. Brooke wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't running. And for the first time in years he didn't want her to. Grayson woke up the next morning with a pounding headache. His body was sore, his muscles aching, but the worst part wasn't the physical pain. It was the emptiness. The bed was empty. Brooke had left. And he hadn't even noticed when. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply as the events from the night before flooded his mind. Her scent. Her warmth. The way she had kissed him back so freely, so confidently. It was like she had come into his life and set it on fire. And now he didn't know how to put the flames out. He had always been in control. Always. But with Brooke he was losing himself. Brooke had given him space. She had let him retreat after that kiss, after everything that had happened. She knew the danger. Knew that Grayson had walls built high and thick, and that he wouldn't let anyone in easily. But she wasn't going anywhere. No matter how far he pushed her away, she wasn't going to run. So when she received a text that morning, asking her to meet him at the rink, she didn't hesitate. She could feel it deep in her gut. This was their turning point. Grayson was already on the ice when she arrived. He was skating laps, his focus entirely on the movements, the rhythm, the way the ice felt beneath his skates. But even as he pushed himself harder, faster, there was something off. Something inside him was fractured. Brooke watched from the sidelines, biting her lip as she took in the sight of him. He was beautiful, so damn powerful, so much control. But she knew now that underneath it all he was just as broken as she was. She could feel it in her chest, in her bones. Grayson was struggling. The question was, could she help him heal? When he saw her standing at the edge of the rink, watching him with those intense eyes, his heart skipped a beat. He almost skated straight into the boards before he quickly corrected his path. She wasn't backing down. She was still here. And he couldn't let her go. He skated over to her, sliding to a stop just a few feet away. The tension between them was palpable, almost suffocating. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Brooke didn't wait for him. She stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Grayson, we can't keep doing this." His chest tightened. Doing what? She met his gaze directly, unflinching. Pretending that this, us, doesn't matter. That we're not connected in ways that neither of us can control. Grayson swallowed hard. "Brooke, you don't understand." "I understand enough," she cut him off, her voice low but unwavering. "We're not just people, Grayson. We're wolves. Alphas and omegas." Her eyes softened slightly. "I know it scares you. I'm scared too. But we don't get to decide how this works." He looked away, running a hand through his hair. "But you don't get it. If I let go, if I let you in like that, I could hurt you." Brooke reached up, placing her hand on his chest, over his heart. "You're already hurting me by pushing me away." Grayson's breath hitched and his pulse quickened. He knew she was right. But letting her in, truly letting her in, felt like an impossible step. Brooke moved a little closer. "I'm not running. And I don't want you to run either." The words struck him like a blow. He opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, Brooke closed the distance, pressing a gentle kiss to his lips. It was soft at first, like a question, an invitation. But then it deepened and Grayson couldn't hold back anymore. His hands came up to her face, pulling her closer, his lips moving against hers, his body responding with a force he couldn't fight. They had crossed a line the night before, but now there were no more lines. Grayson's hands moved to her waist, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. Brooke wrapped her legs around him instinctively, and they both gasped at the contact. Her fingers dug into his shoulders and she could feel the heat of his body, the power in the way he held her. Everything felt too intense, too overwhelming, but it felt right. They pulled apart for a breath and Grayson rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know what to do with you." Brooke smiled, a small, almost teasing grin. "You just have to be with me." His chest tightened again. He hadn't realized how much he had been holding back, how much he had been avoiding this. Avoiding her. But now he couldn't imagine walking away. "I'm not afraid of you," she whispered, her voice soft yet strong. "I'm not afraid of what you can do to me." Grayson's heart raced. "You should be." But instead of pulling away, Brooke held him tighter and her words made his world shift. "Maybe. But I'm not. And I'm not going anywhere." Grayson stared at her for a long moment, every part of him aching with the weight of his emotions. And then finally he let go. He kissed her again, deep and hard, the promise of something more between them, something that neither of them could deny. He wasn't just an alpha anymore. She wasn't just an omega. They were bound not just by the moon but by each other.